Most people don't realize the moment they start falling apart. It rarely arrives with drama. There is no single explosion, no loud announcement that life has gone off track. Instead, it creeps in quietly. A growing sense of heaviness when waking up. A subtle loss of enthusiasm for things that once mattered. A feeling that you are busy all the time, yet somehow moving nowhere. This is usually where rebuilding begins, not because someone planned it, but because something inside finally admits that the old way of living no longer works. Rebuilding yourself is not about becoming someone entirely new. It is about stripping away what no longer fits and rediscovering what was buried under habits, expectations, and compromises. Many people confuse rebuilding with fixing. Fixing implies something is broken beyond dignity. Rebuilding, on the other hand, assumes there is still a strong foundation beneath the damage. It respects the past while refusing to be trapped by it. The first truth that often becomes clear is that most personal collapse does not come from failure, but from misalignment. People spend years chasing goals that were never truly theirs. They follow paths chosen by family, culture, fear, or comparison. Over time, this creates a quiet inner conflict. On the outside, things may look acceptable or even successful, but internally there is resistance. Energy leaks. Motivation fades. Life begins to feel like an obligation rather than an expression. Rebuilding begins the moment a person takes radical responsibility for their inner state. Not blame, not shame, but responsibility. This means acknowledging that no one else can reorganize your life for you. Past circumstances may explain how you arrived here, but they cannot be allowed to decide where you go next. This realization can feel heavy at first, but it quickly becomes empowering. Responsibility returns control to where it belongs. Before any visible change can happen, there is usually a period of internal stillness. This is uncomfortable for people who are used to constant distraction. Silence exposes unanswered questions. It reveals emotions that were pushed aside. Yet this pause is essential. Without it, rebuilding becomes just another form of escape, a new routine designed to avoid the same truths. In this stillness, a person begins to notice patterns. Not just what went wrong recently, but what has repeated across years. Similar relationships with different faces. The same mistakes wearing different disguises. The same self-sabotage appearing whenever progress feels real. These patterns are not accidents. They are signals pointing toward beliefs that were never consciously chosen but deeply absorbed. Many of these beliefs form early in life. Ideas about worth, success, love, and safety. If someone learned that approval equals survival, they may rebuild their life around pleasing others while abandoning themselves. If someone learned that failure is dangerous, they may avoid growth entirely and call it comfort. Rebuilding requires gently questioning these inherited ideas, not with anger, but with honesty. At this stage, people often feel tempted to rush ahead. They want immediate transformation, dramatic discipline, or visible progress. But rebuilding too fast creates fragile structures. Real change requires understanding the emotional reasons behind behavior, not just replacing habits mechanically. A person who forces discipline without addressing inner resistance eventually burns out or rebels. One of the most difficult realizations in rebuilding is recognizing the role of identity. People do not cling to bad habits because they enjoy suffering. They cling to them because those habits support an identity that feels familiar. Even pain can feel safer than uncertainty. Letting go of an old self can feel like a small death. There is grief involved, even when that version of you was unhappy. This is why rebuilding is not a motivational process. Motivation rises and falls. Rebuilding is a commitment to clarity. It is choosing to see yourself accurately, without romanticizing your potential or demonizing your flaws. It is understanding that discipline is not punishment, but self-respect in action. As awareness deepens, priorities begin to shift. External validation loses some of its power. The constant need to prove something softens. Instead, a quieter question emerges. Does this align with who I am trying to become? This question becomes a compass. It simplifies decisions that once felt overwhelming. Rebuilding also involves redefining success. Many people realize that their old definition was borrowed. Money without meaning, productivity without fulfillment, achievement without peace. Another critical part of rebuilding is learning to regulate the inner world. Thoughts, emotions, and reactions are no longer treated as commands, but as signals. A setback no longer means personal failure. It becomes information. An uncomfortable emotion no longer requires immediate escape. It becomes something to listen to. This shift alone can change the entire experience of life. As internal stability grows, the external world begins to respond differently. Boundaries become clearer. Relationships either deepen or fall away. This can be unsettling. Rebuilding often leads to loneliness before connection. Old dynamics no longer fit, and new ones have not yet formed. This is a normal and necessary phase, even though it feels uncomfortable. What sustains a person through this phase is trust. Not blind optimism, but trust built from small promises kept to oneself. Waking up when you said you would. Stopping when rest is needed. Speaking honestly instead of pleasing automatically. Each small act reinforces the message that you can rely on yourself again. Gradually, the chaos quiets. Not because life becomes easy, but because the inner structure becomes stronger. Decisions require less force. Discipline feels less like resistance and more like alignment. The person you are becoming starts to feel familiar, even though they are new. This is only the beginning of rebuilding. The foundation is being cleared, beliefs examined, and internal authority reclaimed. The visible changes will come later, but without this internal work, they would never last. What follows next is the deliberate construction of a life that reflects clarity instead of confusion, intention instead of reaction, and self-trust instead of self-betrayal. And that is where the real work quietly starts to take shape. At some point after the inner noise begins to settle, a different kind of discomfort appears. It is not the chaos of confusion anymore, but the uneasiness of responsibility. When clarity grows, excuses lose their power. You can no longer claim ignorance about what drains you or what strengthens you. This is the moment where rebuilding moves from awareness into action, and many people quietly stop here. Not because they are incapable, but because action forces consistency, and consistency exposes character. Rebuilding yourself is not about making one bold decision that changes everything overnight. It is about choosing the same direction repeatedly, especially on days when nothing feels inspiring. This is where many misunderstand discipline. They think discipline is intensity, strict rules, or harsh self-control. In reality, discipline is agreement. It is the quiet agreement you make with your future self and then honor daily, even when no one is watching. The first area where this agreement is tested is in how you manage your energy. Most people believe they lack time, when what they truly lack is energy that is protected and directed. Scattered attention creates scattered results. Rebuilding requires an honest look at where your energy leaks. Endless scrolling, shallow conversations, commitments made out of guilt, and constant mental noise all drain far more than people realize. Cutting these is not about becoming rigid. It is about respecting your limited capacity. As energy becomes more intentional, focus begins to deepen. Focus is not forcing your mind to concentrate. It is removing what competes for your attention. When distractions are reduced, effort feels lighter. This is why rebuilding often includes simplification. Fewer goals, fewer obligations, fewer voices influencing your decisions. Simplicity creates momentum because it removes friction. Another essential shift during this phase is learning to work with your emotions rather than against them. Many people were taught that emotions are weaknesses to be controlled or ignored. In rebuilding, emotions become data. They tell you when something is misaligned, when a boundary is being crossed, or when a need is unmet. Ignoring them leads back to the same collapse that made rebuilding necessary in the first place. This does not mean letting emotions dictate behavior. It means acknowledging them without letting them take the steering wheel. There is a difference between feeling tired and quitting everything, and feeling tired and adjusting your pace. Emotional maturity grows when you respond instead of react. Over time, this creates a sense of inner steadiness that does not depend on circumstances. As actions become more aligned, identity begins to shift again, but this time from the inside out. You stop asking who you want to be and start acting like the person you respect. Confidence emerges not from affirmations, but from evidence. Each kept promise becomes proof. Each difficult conversation handled honestly strengthens self-trust. Confidence built this way is quiet and durable. Relationships often undergo noticeable changes during this phase. Some connections naturally fade because they were built on versions of you that no longer exist. Others become strained because growth disrupts familiar roles. This can bring guilt, especially for people who were conditioned to prioritize harmony over honesty. Rebuilding requires accepting that not everyone will grow with you, and that this does not make you selfish. At the same time, new relationships may feel slow to form. You are no longer bonding through shared distractions or mutual complaining. You are seeking depth, alignment, and respect. These connections take longer to develop, but they are far more nourishing. Learning to be comfortable in this in-between space is part of the process. Another critical element of rebuilding is learning how to fail properly. Failure does not disappear when you become more intentional. In fact, it often becomes more visible because you are aiming higher. The difference is in how failure is interpreted. Instead of becoming a judgment of self-worth, it becomes feedback. What worked, what didn't, and what needs adjustment. This mindset prevents small setbacks from turning into full collapses. Rest also takes on a new meaning. Rest is no longer avoidance or numbing. It becomes deliberate recovery. You begin to understand that rest supports discipline rather than opposing it. Without rest, clarity erodes, emotions become reactive, and old habits return. Sustainable rebuilding requires cycles of effort and renewal. Slowly, a new rhythm forms. Days feel less chaotic even when they are full. Decisions feel clearer because this stage of rebuilding is not dramatic. It does not produce constant excitement. What it offers instead is stability. And stability, while often underestimated, is the ground on which meaningful growth stands. Without it, ambition collapses under pressure. With it, progress becomes inevitable. As this stability settles in, a deeper question starts to surface. If you are no longer rebuilding just to escape pain, what are you building toward? Purpose begins to replace survival. Direction begins to replace reaction. And this question, quietly forming beneath the surface, is what leads to the next phase of transformation. That is where rebuilding shifts from once survival is no longer the main concern. Something unfamiliar begins to happen. Space opens up inside. The constant tension of holding life together loosens, and in that quiet space a deeper question gains clarity. It is no longer about fixing what is broken, but about deciding what deserves to exist in your life at all. This is where rebuilding turns into deliberate creation, and where many people feel both excited and uneasy at the same time. Creation requires intention, and intention demands honesty. You can no longer hide behind urgency or crisis. When life stabilizes, the absence of chaos removes distractions, and what remains is your true direction, or the lack of it. This can feel uncomfortable because it exposes how often people confuse motion with meaning. Being busy once felt productive. Now it feels empty if it lacks purpose. Purpose, however, does not arrive as a sudden revelation. It is not a single passion or dramatic calling. It emerges quietly through patterns of interest, values, and contribution. It grows clearer as you notice what naturally holds your attention without forcing it, what problems you feel drawn to solve, and what kind of effort leaves you fulfilled rather than drained. Purpose is less about what impresses others and more about what feels internally coherent. At this stage, rebuilding requires patience of a different kind. Earlier, patience was about enduring discomfort and uncertainty. Now it is about allowing direction to mature without rushing it into a shape that looks good on the surface. Many people sabotage this phase by forcing big decisions too quickly, afraid that slowing down means stagnation. In reality, this is the phase where depth is formed. Values become central here, not the values people claim in conversation, but the ones revealed by behavior. What you protect, what you prioritize, what you refuse to compromise. Rebuilding asks you to bring these values into conscious awareness and let them guide choices consistently. When values and actions align, life feels simpler, even when it is challenging. This alignment also reshapes ambition. Ambition becomes less about proving worth and more about expressing capability. The need for constant validation fades. You no longer chase goals to silence insecurity. Instead, goals become containers for growth, discipline, and contribution. This shift changes how success feels. It becomes quieter, more internal, and more satisfying. Work, in particular, begins to feel different. Whether professional or personal, effort gains meaning when it connects to values. You start measuring progress not only by outcomes, but by how you show up during the process. Integrity becomes more important than speed. Craft becomes more important than recognition. This mindset builds something far more durable than short-term wins. Fear still exists at this stage, but it changes form. It is no longer the fear of collapse, but the fear of potential. The fear of choosing wrongly, of committing fully, of realizing how much is possible if you stop holding back. This fear is subtle and often disguised as overthinking or perfectionism. Rebuilding requires recognizing it for what it is and moving forward anyway, carefully but decisively. Another important realization during this phase is that growth is not linear. Some days you will feel deeply aligned and confident. Other days old doubts resurface without warning. This does not mean you are regressing. It means you are human. Rebuilding teaches you not to dramatize these fluctuations. You learn to return to your center without panic, knowing that stability is built over time, not maintained perfectly. Contribution begins to matter more here. Once your own foundation feels secure, attention naturally shifts outward. Not in a self-sacrificing way, but in a grounded one. You begin to ask how your skills, insights, and experiences can be useful beyond your own life. This is where rebuilding becomes expansive rather than self-focused. Contribution does not require grand gestures. It often starts with presence, reliability, and honesty. Being someone others can depend on. Offering clarity instead of noise. Creating something that reflects care and thought. These acts create meaning because they connect personal growth to the world beyond the self. At the same time, boundaries remain essential. Creation does not mean saying yes to everything. In fact, it requires stronger discernment. You become selective with commitments. As life becomes more intentional, time starts to feel different. Days no longer blur together. There is a sense of continuity, as if each choice builds upon the last. This creates quiet confidence, not because everything is controlled, but because your actions are coherent. You trust your direction even when the outcome is uncertain. Rebuilding also deepens self-compassion at this stage. You stop measuring yourself against unrealistic ideals. You accept limitations without using them as excuses. You understand that growth includes rest, recalibration, and sometimes stepping back. This compassion prevents the return of self-criticism that once fueled collapse. Gradually, a new identity solidifies, not as a label, but as a lived experience. You are no longer someone trying to rebuild. You are someone building. Life feels authored rather than endured. Challenges still arise, but they meet a stronger inner structure. Yet even here, rebuilding is not finished. It never truly is. What changes is your relationship with change itself. You no longer fear it as a threat to stability. You recognize it as part of staying alive, aware, and aligned. And just beyond this phase lies an even deeper layer of rebuilding, one that moves beyond personal clarity into long-term impact, legacy, and the kind of life that continues to matter even when circumstances shift again. There comes a point when rebuilding no longer feels like a personal project. It stops revolving around self-improvement and starts expressing itself as a way of being. The focus subtly shifts from who you are becoming to how you live, how you treat others, and what remains steady in you regardless of circumstance. This is where rebuilding matures into something quieter, deeper, and far more enduring. At this stage, stability is no longer fragile. It has been tested by uncertainty, disappointment, and restraint. You have learned that control is limited, that effort does not guarantee outcomes, and that clarity does not remove difficulty. What it does provide is resilience. You bend without breaking. You adjust without losing direction. This resilience becomes the core of your character. One of the most meaningful shifts here is the relationship with time. Urgency fades, not because ambition disappears, but because perspective deepens. You understand that meaningful things unfold over years, not moments. This allows patience to replace pressure. Decisions are no longer rushed to escape discomfort or impress others. They are made with an awareness of long-term consequences and quiet confidence in delayed results. This is also where the idea of legacy begins to take shape, even if it is never named explicitly. Legacy is not about recognition or being remembered by many. It is about what continues because you lived the way you did, the habits you modeled, the standards you upheld, the way you listened, spoke, and showed up when it mattered. These things ripple outward in ways you may never fully see. Rebuilding at this level is less about adding more and more about refining. You remove what is unnecessary. You simplify routines, commitments, and even ambitions. What remains feels essential. There is a sense of elegance in how life is structured, not because it is minimal, but because it is intentional. Nothing is there by accident. Relationships deepen in a different way now. You are no longer trying to be understood by everyone. You value being understood by a few. Conversations become slower, more thoughtful. Listening becomes more important than being impressive. You notice that presence itself has become one of your strongest contributions. People feel steadier around you, even if they cannot explain why. This stage also brings a clearer acceptance of human limitation. You recognize that you cannot save everyone, fix everything, or live every possible life. Instead of resisting this, you make peace with it. This acceptance does not shrink you, it focuses you. Energy is directed where it can genuinely matter rather than scattered across endless possibilities. Work and effort take on a quieter dignity. There is less need to announce goals or broadcast progress. Satisfaction comes from knowing that what you do is aligned, honest, and well considered. Even when results are imperfect, the process feels clean. There is no internal contradiction, no sense of self-betrayal. Interestingly, this is often when life introduces new challenges. Not because you are being tested, but because growth changes what you are capable of handling. These challenges are more complex, less dramatic, and require wisdom rather than force. They ask for discernment, patience, and emotional intelligence. The tools you built during rebuilding now reveal their true value. Another subtle transformation is how you relate to uncertainty. Earlier in life, uncertainty felt like danger. During rebuilding, it felt like a problem to solve. Now, it feels like a constant companion. You understand that certainty is rare and temporary. Instead of seeking guarantees, you cultivate adaptability. This makes you calm in situations that once would have overwhelmed you. There is also a deeper sense of gratitude that develops here, not the loud, performative kind, but a quiet appreciation for ordinary stability. Mornings that begin without chaos. Conversations that feel honest. Work that feels meaningful enough. This gratitude grounds you and prevents the return of restlessness that once drove dissatisfaction. Rebuilding at this stage does not eliminate ambition, but it changes its tone. Ambition becomes service-oriented. You think less about what you can extract from life and more about what you can contribute without depletion. This does not mean self-neglect. It means understanding that fulfillment often comes from creating value beyond yourself. Perhaps the most important realization here is that rebuilding was never about reaching a final version of yourself. This trust becomes the true outcome of rebuilding. Not confidence that nothing will go wrong, but confidence that you will not abandon yourself when it does. You know how to slow down, reassess, and rebuild again if needed, without losing dignity or direction. In the end, rebuilding yourself is less about transformation and more about remembering. Remembering what matters. Remembering your capacity for clarity. Remembering that a meaningful life is not built through intensity, but through consistency, honesty, and care. And with that understanding, rebuilding quietly. Eventually, a subtle realization settles in, one that does not arrive with celebration or relief, but with calm acceptance. You understand that the work you once called rebuilding is no longer something you actively think about. It has become embedded in how you move through the world. The questions that once consumed you have softened, not because everything has been answered, but because you now know how to live without needing all the answers at once. Life begins to feel less like a problem to solve and more like a process to participate in. You stop waiting for a future version of yourself to finally feel at peace. Peace, you learn, is not a destination. It is a practice. It exists in how you start your mornings, how you respond to friction, how you speak when it would be easier to withdraw or attack. These small moments, repeated consistently, shape a life that feels grounded. One of the quiet strengths you develop is discernment. You no longer feel compelled to react to everything that demands attention. Not every opinion deserves engagement. Not every opportunity deserves pursuit. Not every conflict deserves resolution. This restraint is not indifference, it is wisdom. You have learned that attention is one of the most valuable resources you have, and where you place it shapes your inner world. This discernment also applies inward. You notice thoughts arise without immediately believing them. You feel emotions without being overtaken by them. You recognize impulses without surrendering to them. This inner space creates freedom. You are no longer ruled by your internal weather. You can act according to values even when emotions pull in another direction. With this freedom comes humility. Rebuilding teaches you how easily anyone can lose their way, and how much patience growth actually requires. You become less judgmental, not because standards disappear, but because understanding deepens. You know how complex people are, how layered their choices can be. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it allows you to respond with clarity rather than contempt. Another change becomes noticeable in how you experience success and failure. Success no longer inflates the ego, and failure no longer collapses it. Both are integrated as temporary states, not definitions of self. This emotional balance allows you to keep going without dramatic swings. Progress becomes steady, even when outcomes fluctuate. There is also a renewed relationship with solitude. Being alone no longer feels like emptiness or isolation. It feels like spaciousness. You can sit with yourself without restlessness. This does not replace connection with others, but it enriches it. When you no longer need others to complete you, you can meet them more fully, without expectation or dependency. At the same time, connection gains depth. You listen more than you speak. You ask better questions. You allow pauses without rushing to fill them. These qualities make conversations feel real again, not transactional or performative. You notice that people open up more around you, not because you offer solutions, but because you offer presence. Rebuilding also reshapes how you handle endings. When something no longer fits, you can let it go without turning it into a personal failure. You understand that endings are not signs of incompetence, but of growth. A role, a relationship, or a version of yourself can be honored and released at the same time. This ability prevents stagnation and resentment. There is a quiet courage that develops here. Not the loud kind that seeks recognition, but the steady kind that chooses honesty over comfort. You say what needs to be said with care. You act even when outcomes are uncertain. You remain aligned even when it costs you convenience. This courage is what sustains integrity over the long term. As years pass, you begin to see how rebuilding was never linear or confined to a single period. It happened in layers. Each challenge added depth. Each pause added clarity. Each recalibration strengthened your internal structure. You no longer fear future breakdowns as much, because you trust your capacity to respond with awareness rather than panic. What ultimately remains is a sense of authorship over your life. Not control, but authorship. You understand that you are not the sole cause of everything that happens, but you are responsible for how you meet it. This distinction brings peace. You stop fighting reality and start working with it. In this way, rebuilding becomes invisible. It no longer announces itself as effort. It shows up as steadiness, as consistency, as a life that feels lived on purpose, even when imperfect. And perhaps that is the quiet reward of the entire journey. You do not emerge as someone flawless or finished. There is a certain stillness that arrives when nothing feels missing. Not because life is perfect, but because the constant urge to become someone else has finally quieted. You are no longer chasing an imagined future self to justify the present. Instead, you are fully inhabiting who you are, moment by moment, with awareness and care. This is not resignation. It is grounded acceptance, and it changes everything. At this point, identity becomes flexible rather than rigid. You no longer define yourself by roles, achievements, or past struggles. Those things exist, but they do not confine you. If life requires you to change direction again, you know you can. If circumstances remove something you once relied on, you trust that you will adapt. This flexibility is not instability, it is strength without attachment. One of the most profound outcomes of rebuilding is the ability to remain internally anchored while externally open. You can listen to opposing ideas without feeling threatened. You can receive feedback without collapsing or becoming defensive. You can change your mind without feeling weak. This openness makes learning continuous rather than episodic. You also begin to notice how much unnecessary tension most people carry. The constant comparison, the need to be ahead, the fear of falling behind. Because you have lived inside that tension and stepped out of it, you recognize it instantly. This recognition does not create distance between you and others, it creates compassion. You understand how heavy life feels when it is driven by fear rather than clarity. With this compassion comes a more patient way of guiding others, if you choose to. You no longer try to convince or correct. You model steadiness. You share perspective when invited. You allow others to arrive at their own insights in their own time. This approach carries more influence than any argument ever could. Rebuilding also teaches you how to move through loss with dignity. Loss does not disappear, even in a well-lived life. People leave. Opportunities close. Health changes. What changes is your relationship with grief. You allow it to exist without letting it define you. You mourn honestly, then slowly reorient. You do not rush healing, and you do not dramatize pain. You trust the process of integration. Joy, too, becomes quieter and more sustainable. It is no longer dependent on peak experiences. It shows up in simple rhythms, a sense of ease in your body, a day that unfolds without inner conflict, a moment of shared understanding. This kind of joy does not demand attention, but it lasts. As rebuilding settles into this deeper layer, time feels less like something slipping away and more like something unfolding. You stop counting years as measures of urgency. Instead, you measure them by depth of experience and quality of presence. This shift reduces anxiety about the future and regret about the past. Both lose their grip when you are fully engaged with the present. There is also a renewed sense of responsibility, but it is no longer heavy. It feels chosen. You understand that your way of being affects more than just your own life. Your calm influences tension. Your clarity influences confusion. Your consistency influences trust. This awareness encourages care without burden. At times, you may still encounter moments of doubt. They do not vanish completely, but now doubt is familiar, almost like an old acquaintance. You know how to sit with it without letting it dictate your actions. You recognize when it signals growth rather than danger. This familiarity prevents doubt from escalating into paralysis. Rebuilding at this level also refines your relationship with ambition even further. You may still pursue goals, but you are no longer consumed by them. You can work intensely without losing yourself. You can step back without guilt. Success and rest coexist without conflict. This balance protects you from returning to the cycles that once required rebuilding. Perhaps the most subtle transformation is how you experience meaning. Meaning is no longer something you search for. It emerges naturally from living in alignment. When your actions reflect your values and your attention is present, life feels meaningful without explanation. There is nothing to prove. In this way, rebuilding completes a full circle. What began as fragmentation ends as integration. What began as confusion ends as coherence. Not because everything is resolved, but because you have learned how to live well inside uncertainty. And if life one day asks you to rebuild again, you will not fear it. You will recognize the signs early. You will slow down sooner. You will listen more carefully. You will rebuild not from desperation, but from wisdom. That is the quiet power of this journey. At some stage, often without any clear marker, you realize that rebuilding has changed the way you relate to existence itself. Life is no longer divided into phases of control and collapse. It feels more fluid, more forgiving. You understand that stability is not something you achieve and then defend, but something you continuously create through awareness, choice, and adjustment. This understanding brings a sense of ease that does not depend on circumstances. You begin to notice how naturally you respond to challenges now. Where there was once resistance, there is curiosity. Where there was once fear, there is assessment. You ask quieter questions. What is being asked of me here? What is within my control, and what is not? This way of meeting difficulty prevents unnecessary suffering. You no longer add judgment to pain or panic to uncertainty. Rebuilding ultimately teaches you how to live in alignment with reality rather than in conflict with it. You accept that effort does not guarantee fairness, that good intentions do not prevent loss, and that progress does not erase vulnerability. Instead of resenting these truths, you incorporate them. This realism grounds you and allows gratitude to coexist with ambition. There is also a noticeable shift in how you experience your inner dialogue. The voice that once criticized and rushed you becomes more reasonable, even kind. It does not flatter you or lie, but it speaks with accuracy and care. This internal relationship becomes one of the greatest assets you carry. When you trust how you speak to yourself, external noise loses influence. Another quiet outcome of rebuilding is the ability to tolerate ambiguity. You no longer need everything to be defined, labeled, or resolved immediately. You can hold unanswered questions without anxiety. This tolerance creates intellectual and emotional flexibility. It allows you to explore ideas, relationships, and possibilities without forcing premature conclusions. As you live from this place, you may notice that others experience you differently, not as someone impressive or dominant, but as someone steady. People sense when someone is not performing a role or chasing approval. This steadiness creates psychological safety. It invites honesty. It makes interactions simpler and more human. Rebuilding also reshapes how you think about effort. You stop glorifying exhaustion and start valuing sustainability. Hard work still matters, but it is guided by rhythm rather than urgency. You know when to push and when to pause. This self-awareness prevents burnout and supports long-term contribution. Over time, you begin to appreciate how ordinary moments carry depth. A walk without distraction, a task done with care, a conversation where nothing needs to be proven. These moments may not stand out on the surface, but they form the texture of a life well lived. You no longer overlook them in pursuit of something more dramatic. There is also a deeper reconciliation with the past. You stop replaying old versions of yourself with regret or embarrassment. You see them as necessary stages, shaped by the awareness available at the time. This forgiveness does not rewrite history, but it releases emotional weight. The past becomes a teacher rather than a burden. Rebuilding teaches you that self-respect is not built through harshness, but through consistency. You show up when you say you will. You rest when rest is needed. You speak honestly when silence would be easier. These choices accumulate quietly, reinforcing trust in yourself and stability in your life. As the years move forward, you may find that your goals evolve again. Some fall away, others take their place. What remains constant is the way you approach them. With curiosity instead of pressure. With commitment instead of obsession. With openness instead of fear. This approach keeps growth alive without turning it into a struggle. Perhaps the most important realization at this stage is that rebuilding never separated you from life. It brought you closer to it. You feel more present in your body, more attentive in your relationships, more thoughtful in your work. Life feels textured rather than rushed. And in this closeness, you understand something simple and profound. You were never meant to arrive at a final version of yourself. You were meant to remain in conversation with who you are becoming. Rebuilding was the language that taught you how to. There is a quiet completeness that settles in when you stop measuring life against an imagined ideal. Not because you have lowered your standards, but because you have refined them. You no longer ask whether life looks impressive from the outside. You ask whether it feels honest from the inside. That single shift changes how you evaluate almost everything. By now, rebuilding has shaped an internal posture rather than a set of behaviors. You move through the world with less friction because you are not constantly resisting what is. You still care deeply. You still aim to grow, but you are no longer at war with yourself or with reality. This inner cooperation creates a calm strength that does not need to announce itself. You begin to trust timing in a way that once felt impossible. Not as blind faith, but as lived understanding. You have seen how forcing outcomes leads to distortion, and how patience allows things to unfold with more integrity. This trust does not make you passive. It makes you precise. You act when action is needed and wait when waiting is wiser. One of the most meaningful changes is how you experience responsibility. It is no longer something you carry as pressure. It feels like ownership without heaviness. You take responsibility for your choices, your words, your attention. And because this responsibility is chosen rather than imposed, it feels empowering rather than exhausting. There is also a deeper intimacy with yourself. You know your rhythms. You know when you are pushing for the right reasons and when you are avoiding something uncomfortable. This self-knowledge is not used to judge, but to guide. It allows you to course, correct gently instead of waiting for breakdowns to force change. Rebuilding has also taught you how to stay grounded during success. When things go well, you do not lose yourself in expansion. You remain anchored. You remember what actually sustains you. This prevents the cycle of overreach followed by collapse that defines so many lives. At the same time, you are no longer afraid of contraction. Slower seasons no longer threaten your identity. You understand that rest, reflection, and simplicity are not regressions. They are recalibrations. This understanding gives your life a natural rhythm that feels humane rather than demanding. As you continue living this way, you may notice that meaning no longer feels like something you have to manufacture. It arises from alignment, from doing ordinary things with care, from acting in ways that match what you value. Meaning becomes less philosophical and more practical. It lives in how you show up. You also come to see that rebuilding yourself was never a selfish act. By becoming clearer, steadier, and more grounded, you reduce the amount of unconscious harm you cause. You listen better. You react less. You contribute more thoughtfully. This quiet impact matters more than grand gestures ever could. In this final layer, there is a deep acceptance of impermanence. You understand that everything you have built will change in some form. Health, roles, relationships, capacity. Instead of clinging to permanence, you invest in adaptability and presence. You hold things with care, not with fear. This acceptance brings peace without complacency. You still engage fully. You still love deeply. You still commit. But you do so knowing that change is not a failure of effort. It is the nature of life. This perspective softens loss and enriches appreciation. Rebuilding ultimately returns you to something simple: attention. You learn to give your attention to what is real, what is meaningful, and what is within reach. You stop wasting it on comparison, resentment, or imagined futures. Attention becomes an act of respect toward your own life. And perhaps that is the quiet conclusion of this entire journey. Rebuilding yourself was never about constructing a perfect life. It was about learning how to live consciously inside an imperfect one. How to remain awake, aligned, and humane no matter what changes. From here, there is nothing left to chase. Only something. There is a sense of quiet continuity that defines this stage of life. You no longer experience growth as a series of breakthroughs or collapses. It feels more like a steady unfolding, where each day carries its own weight and meaning without needing to stand out. This does not make life dull. It makes it honest. By now, rebuilding has dissolved into presence. You are not constantly narrating your progress or evaluating yourself. You are simply living. This absence of self-surveillance creates mental spaciousness. You have more room to notice what is actually happening rather than what you think should be happening. One of the most subtle yet powerful changes is how you experience choice. You realize that most of life is shaped by small, repeated decisions rather than dramatic turning points. What you give your attention to, how you speak when tired, whether you tell the truth when it feels inconvenient. These moments accumulate quietly, shaping character over time. Because you understand this, you no longer underestimate small actions. You see how consistency outperforms intensity. You stop waiting for motivation and rely instead on clarity and habit. This approach makes growth sustainable, not exhausting. There is also a deeper peace with not knowing. Earlier in life, uncertainty felt like a problem to solve or a threat to manage. Now it feels like open space. You understand that not all questions require immediate answers, and some answers only reveal themselves through lived experience. This patience prevents unnecessary anxiety. Rebuilding has refined your sense of self to the point where external validation holds little sway. Praise is appreciated, but not needed. Criticism is considered, but not internalized automatically. Your worth is no longer negotiated through reaction. This inner stability allows you to remain open without becoming porous. As a result, your relationships feel cleaner. You communicate more directly. You listen without preparing responses. You allow others to be as they are without trying to manage their perceptions. This does not eliminate conflict, but it makes it more workable and less personal. Another change is how you relate to effort and rest. You no longer see them as opposing forces. Effort is applied where it matters. Rest is taken without guilt. This balance protects both your energy and your clarity. You recognize when pushing is aligned and when it is driven by old patterns of proving. Over time, you also develop a refined sense of enough achievement, enough connection, enough stimulation. This sense of sufficiency is not complacency. It is freedom from excess. It allows you to enjoy what is present without constantly reaching for more. This sufficiency extends to how you relate to yourself. You no longer treat yourself as a project that needs endless improvement. Growth continues, but it is integrated into living rather than separated from it. You allow yourself to be human without turning every flaw into a mission. Rebuilding has also clarified your relationship with contribution. You no longer feel the need to make a dramatic impact. You understand the power of reliability, integrity, and quiet excellence. Being someone who can be counted on becomes a form of leadership in itself. There is a deeper awareness now of how interconnected life is. Your mood affects others. Your choices ripple outward. This awareness does not create pressure. It creates care. You act with a sense of responsibility that feels grounded rather than moralistic. As the years continue, you may notice that life still brings challenges, but they arrive without the same internal resistance. You meet them with steadiness. You respond rather than react. You adjust without losing your center. This does not make life easy, but it makes it workable. In this way, rebuilding reaches a kind of completion that does not close anything. It opens a way of living that remains responsive, thoughtful, and real. You are not finished. You are not perfected. You are simply present, engaged, and capable. And perhaps that is the most mature outcome of all. Not becoming someone extraordinary, but becoming someone deep. At the far end of this journey, there is no sense of arrival, only a gentle familiarity with yourself and with life as it is. You are no longer searching for closure or a final lesson. What you carry now is orientation. You know how to face things. You know how to return to center when life pulls you away. This knowledge is quiet, practical, and deeply earned. Rebuilding, in its final expression, reveals that nothing extraordinary was required. No reinvention, no dramatic escape. Only attention, honesty, and the willingness to stay present through discomfort. These simple qualities, practiced over time, changed everything. Not all at once, but gradually, almost invisibly. You begin to live with a lighter grip on identity. You do not need to define yourself tightly in order to feel secure. You can be many things across different seasons without feeling fragmented. This flexibility allows growth to continue without threatening coherence. You are the same person, even as circumstances and roles evolve. One of the most grounding realizations is that life does not need to be optimized to be meaningful. You stop chasing the perfect routine, the perfect balance, the perfect version of yourself. Instead, you focus on what is workable and honest. This removes pressure and restores dignity to ordinary living. There is also a deep trust now in your ability to navigate difficulty. Not because you expect things to go well, but because you know you can respond with clarity and care. You no longer fear hardship as proof that you have failed. You see it as part of the human experience, one you are capable of meeting. Rebuilding has also reshaped how you understand happiness. Happiness is no longer something you pursue directly. It emerges as a byproduct of alignment. When your actions reflect your values and your attention is present, contentment arises naturally. It does not demand excitement. It simply exists. You move through days with a sense of quiet stewardship. You take care of what has been entrusted to you: your health, your work, your relationships, your inner world. This care is not obsessive. It is steady. It reflects respect for life rather than fear of loss. Another subtle change is how you handle moments of friction. When something irritates or disappoints you, you pause. You notice. You choose your response. This pause, once unthinkable, is now second nature. It prevents unnecessary damage and preserves clarity. As time goes on, you become more comfortable with simplicity. You need fewer explanations, fewer justifications, fewer performances. Life feels less crowded internally. This simplicity is not minimalism as an aesthetic, but as an experience. There is space to think, to feel, to notice. Rebuilding ultimately leaves you with a sense of belonging to your own life. You are no longer living as if you are slightly out of place, waiting to arrive somewhere else. You are here, fully, imperfectly, intentionally. And in this belonging, there is peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the absence of self-abandonment. You stay with yourself through uncertainty, change, and challenge. You do not turn away. That is the final gift of rebuilding. Not transformation in the dramatic sense, but continuity. The ability to remain connected to yourself across all seasons of life. From here, nothing needs to be concluded. Life continues. You continue. And there is a moment, often unnoticed, when you realize that nothing inside you is asking to be fixed anymore. Not because you are flawless, but because you have stopped viewing yourself as a problem. Life still presents tension, uncertainty, and loss, yet none of it translates into the belief that you are fundamentally lacking. This shift is subtle, but it changes the tone of everything. You begin to experience yourself as a participant in life rather than a project under constant renovation. Growth continues, but it is no longer driven by self-rejection. It is guided by curiosity, care, and responsibility. This difference matters. When growth is rooted in respect, it feels expansive instead of exhausting. Rebuilding, at its deepest level, teaches you how to stay with experience without rushing to interpret or improve it. You can sit with discomfort without immediately trying to escape or reframe it. You can enjoy pleasure without clinging. You can witness change without panic. This capacity creates emotional maturity that cannot be rushed or forced. There is also a noticeable shift in how you relate to effort. You no longer equate effort with worth. Working hard does not make you more deserving, and resting does not make you lazy. Effort becomes a tool rather than an identity. You use it when it serves alignment, and you release it when it does not. This clarity reshapes ambition one last time. Ambition becomes quiet, selective, and deeply personal. You choose what to invest in based on meaning rather than status. You allow yourself to want things without letting desire turn into pressure. This balance keeps ambition alive without letting it dominate. Another outcome of rebuilding is the ability to live without constant comparison. You understand that comparing lives flattens complexity. Everyone carries different constraints, values, and timing. Once you truly accept this, comparison loses its grip. You focus on coherence rather than competition. You also develop a gentler relationship with memory. The past is no longer something you revisit to extract judgment or justification. It becomes context. It informs who you are without defining who you must be. This allows gratitude and grief to coexist without cancelling each other out. As rebuilding settles into this final expression, there is a deeper acceptance of solitude and connection alike. You no longer fear being alone, and you no longer seek connection to fill emptiness. You engage with others from fullness rather than need. This changes the quality of every relationship. There is also an increased sensitivity to what feels true. You notice when something is slightly off, even if you cannot immediately explain why. You trust this intuition without dramatizing it. This sensitivity keeps your life aligned without requiring constant analysis. Rebuilding has also taught you how to exit situations cleanly. You leave when it is time, not in anger or avoidance, but in honesty. You do not stay to prove endurance, and you do not leave to escape discomfort. You choose based on clarity. In this way, rebuilding becomes indistinguishable from wisdom. Not the kind that offers answers to every question, but the kind that knows how to hold questions without fear. You stop demanding certainty from life. You meet it with presence instead. What remains is a steady relationship with yourself. You know how to listen. You know how to respond. You know how to pause. This relationship does not guarantee ease, but it guarantees integrity. And perhaps that is the most complete form of rebuilding. When the impulse to rebuild gives way to the ability to live, adjust, and continue without losing yourself. From here on, there is a quiet humility that marks this final stretch of understanding. You recognize that life did not become meaningful because you mastered it, but because you learned how to move within it without resistance. Control was never the goal. Relationship was. A relationship with your inner world, with others, and with reality as it unfolds. By now, rebuilding has reshaped the way you meet uncertainty. You no longer see it as an interruption to life. You see it as the space where life actually happens. Plans, identities, and expectations shift, but your capacity to stay present remains. This presence becomes your most reliable ground. You understand something now that once felt abstract. That clarity does not come from eliminating confusion, but from staying engaged while clarity slowly forms. Many of the most important truths in life reveal themselves only after you have lived them long enough. Patience, not force, allows them to surface. Rebuilding has also softened your relationship with control. You act with intention, but you release attachment to outcomes. This does not weaken commitment. It strengthens it. When you are not trying to force results, your actions become cleaner, more focused, and more ethical. You do what is right without needing guarantees. Another quiet outcome is gratitude without performance. You no longer feel the need to constantly acknowledge or display appreciation. Gratitude lives in how you care, how you slow down, how you notice. It is embedded in attention rather than expressed as a concept. There is also a renewed respect for limits. You understand your capacity more clearly now. You know when to stop, when to rest, when to ask for help. Limits no longer feel like failures. They feel like information. Working within them creates sustainability and prevents resentment. As rebuilding completes its arc, you see how much of life is shaped by tone rather than content. How you speak matters as much as what you say. How you move through difficulty matters as much as resolving it. This awareness refines your interactions and deepens trust. You also begin to appreciate the role of silence. Not as avoidance, but as space. Silence allows integration. It lets experiences settle without being immediately labeled or judged. In silence, you reconnect with what feels true beneath noise and urgency. Rebuilding has changed how you experience time itself. You no longer feel chased by it. You understand that life is not something to catch up with. It is something to inhabit. This shift eases regret and softens anticipation. You are less pulled by past or future and more anchored in now. At this stage, there is no urge to summarize or conclude. Life does not require a final insight to be valid. You trust the process without needing to frame it. You continue living with attention, care, and adaptability. If rebuilding once felt like a response to crisis, it now feels like a quiet skill you carry. You know how to listen when something is off. You know how to pause before things break. You know how to begin again without drama. And perhaps that is the most human realization of all. That rebuilding was never about becoming unbreakable. It was about becoming responsive. About learning how to meet change without losing yourself. From here, life continues in its ordinary, unpredictable. There is nothing left to explain now, only something to live. The understanding you carry no longer needs words to support it. It shows itself in how you pause before reacting, in how you listen without needing to interrupt, in how you choose simplicity over excess without feeling deprived. This is not a conclusion. It is a way of standing in the world. By this stage, rebuilding has dissolved completely into awareness. You no longer think in terms of progress or regression. You notice alignment and misalignment, and you adjust. There is no drama in this, just responsiveness. Like breathing, it happens because it is necessary, not because it is impressive. You understand that life will continue to test you, not out of cruelty, but out of inevitability. Change, loss, and uncertainty are not lessons to be conquered once and for all. They are recurring conditions of being alive. What has changed is your capacity to remain present without being hardened by them. There is a gentleness in you now that did not exist before. Not softness that avoids difficulty, but gentleness that allows reality to be as it is. This gentleness extends inward and outward. You no longer demand perfection from yourself or others. You ask for honesty, effort, and care, and you offer the same. Rebuilding has also refined your sense of responsibility to something larger than yourself. Not in a grand ideological way, but in the quiet understanding that how you live affects the quality of the space you share with others. You take this seriously without becoming heavy. You act with consideration because it feels right, not because you are trying to be good. At this point, ambition, identity, and purpose have softened into something simpler. You are oriented rather than driven. You know what matters enough to guide you, and you trust yourself enough to adjust when needed. This orientation keeps you from drifting without tying you down. You no longer feel compelled to explain your path. You know that explanation is often a way of seeking permission or validation. You let your life speak for itself. This silence is not secrecy. It is self-trust. There is also an ease in how you experience contradiction. You can hold opposing truths without needing to resolve them immediately. Strength and vulnerability. Commitment and freedom. Effort and acceptance. This ability reflects a maturity that no single insight can produce. Rebuilding has taught you that meaning is not hidden somewhere ahead. It emerges wherever attention meets reality with care. This means meaning is available even in mundane moments, especially there. As you continue forward, there is no checklist to follow, no ideal to reach. There is only the ongoing practice of showing up honestly, adjusting thoughtfully, and staying connected to yourself as life changes. If you ever needed to rebuild again, you would recognize it not as failure, but as a signal. A moment to slow down, listen, and realign. You would not resist it. You would begin again with respect. And that may be the quiet wisdom this entire journey. What remains now is a sense of quiet continuity, a feeling that life is no longer something to figure out, but something to accompany. You walk with it rather than ahead of it. You do not wait for certainty to move, nor do you rush to escape uncertainty. You have learned the pace of listening, and that pace shapes everything. At this stage, rebuilding has left you with a deep respect for ordinary days. You no longer overlook them in search of something more meaningful. You understand that most of life happens here, in repetition, in routine, in moments that seem insignificant until they are gone. This awareness makes you more attentive, more careful with how you spend your time and energy. There is also a refined honesty in how you relate to yourself. You no longer exaggerate your strengths or deny your weaknesses. You see them clearly and work with them rather than against them. This realism brings relief. You are not trying to become exceptional. You are trying to become coherent. You notice how little force is required to live well once resistance drops. When actions align with values, effort feels clean. When boundaries are clear, decisions feel lighter. When attention is present, life feels fuller without needing to be louder. This simplicity is not accidental. It is earned through awareness. Rebuilding has also changed how you experience responsibility to others. You no longer carry it as obligation or guilt. You carry it as care. You show up when you can. You speak honestly when it matters. You step back when stepping back is the most respectful choice. This balance allows connection without depletion. There is a quiet confidence now in your ability to begin again when needed. Not restart everything, but realign. You know how to pause before things unravel. You know how to listen to discomfort before it turns into collapse. This skill prevents many crises from ever needing to happen. As life continues, you may still encounter moments of confusion or fatigue, but they no longer threaten your sense of self. They pass through rather than define you. You respond with curiosity instead of panic, with care instead of criticism. This response changes the entire experience. Rebuilding ultimately leaves you with a grounded sense of agency, not the illusion of control, but the confidence that you can meet whatever arises without abandoning yourself. You trust your capacity to choose, adjust, and continue. You also accept that not everything needs to be understood. Some things only need to be lived. This acceptance removes pressure and restores humility. You are part of something larger than your plans, and that feels reassuring rather than limiting. In this final stretch, life feels less like a task and more like a relationship. One that requires attention, honesty, and patience. One that changes over time. One that cannot be perfected, only participated in. Rebuilding was never about fixing your life into a permanent shape. It was about learning how to stay present as life reshapes itself again and again. You have learned that now, not as an idea, but as a lived truth. From here, you move forward without needing a label for who you are or where you are going. You move with awareness, with care, with a quiet readiness to respond when change comes. And when it does, you will not be surprised. You will not be afraid. You will recognize the moment, take a breath, and begin again, not from confusion, but from clarity. There is a calm finality to this understanding, not because the journey ends, but because the need to frame it as a journey falls away. Life no longer feels like something you are progressing through toward a conclusion. It feels like something you are inhabiting, moment by moment, with attention and care. At this point, rebuilding has given you something more valuable than answers. It has given you orientation. You know how to notice when you are drifting. You know how to return without shame. You know how to listen before reacting. These skills do not announce themselves, but they shape every decision you make. You begin to appreciate how much of life is carried by tone rather than content. How you move through a conversation. How you handle disagreement. How you respond to your own fatigue. These subtle choices define the quality of your days more than any major achievement ever could. there is also a deep trust now in your ability to remain intact through change. You no longer fear becoming lost, because you know how to pause and realign. You understand that clarity is not something you hold onto forever. It is something you return to again and again. Rebuilding has softened your relationship with effort to its most balanced form. You work when work is needed. You rest when rest is needed. You do not confuse either with identity. This balance protects your energy and keeps your life sustainable rather than impressive. You notice that you are less interested in being right and more interested in being honest. Less interested in appearing strong and more interested in being real. This shift simplifies your inner world. You no longer have to maintain an image. You only have to remain attentive. At this stage, life offers no grand conclusion, and none is required. Meaning is no longer something you extract from experience. It is something that emerges naturally when you live in alignment with what you value. This meaning does not demand excitement. It feels steady and sufficient. You also recognize that rebuilding was never about self-focus. It was about learning how not to project unresolved tension onto others or onto life itself. By becoming more coherent internally, you reduced unnecessary friction externally. This quiet contribution matters more than you once realized. As time moves forward, you carry a simple readiness. Not anticipation, not fear. Readiness, a willingness to meet what comes with clarity, humility, and care. You understand that this is the most reliable way to live well. And perhaps this is the final truth that settles in. That a meaningful life is not built through constant improvement, but through consistent presence. Through the choice to stay with yourself, with others, and with reality, even when it is uncomfortable. Rebuilding taught you how to do that. From here on, there is nothing left to prove, nothing left to fix, and nothing left to chase. Only something to continue. A way of living that remains honest, grounded, and quietly resilient. And that is where it rests.